Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to tonight's broadcast from the Workers' Party of Britain. I'll now introduce to you the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, George Galloway.
Thank you very much, comrades of the Workers' Party, for joining me again for our regular Wednesday evening public meeting. And to those friends who haven't joined the party yet, but who are nonetheless watching, I hope enjoying either live or later this discourse. We hope that you will see and hear enough this evening to interest you further in joining, or at least finding out more about the Workers' Party. This has already been a momentous week for us. The public meeting that we held on Monday, which alas I couldn't attend as I was in transit, was such an outstanding success. Tens of thousands of people have watched it, and now that it's been clipped with some of the highlights, the audience will grow and grow. And we were first off the mark with that meeting, drawing attention, not just here, but around the world, to the calvary of the people of Yemen, the poorest country in the Middle East, being crucified by the richest country in the Middle East next door, Saudi Arabia, but with intense, deep involvement by the United States and the United Kingdom in that horrific crucifixion of a large and poor population. And I want to congratulate my comrades in the leadership who organized that meeting and put together that wonderful platform, and to encourage everyone watching this evening also to watch that public meeting on Yemen, the Day of International Solidarity with the people of Yemen. And the Workers' Party was right at the forefront. Speaking of audiences, another record was passed today. At least I think it's a record. One of my clips from Sunday's Mother of All Talk Shows achieved 100,000 views in one day, in 24 hours. And it's not just because, we are good speakers and so on that we're achieving these successes. It's because we are touching the zeitgeist. We are putting our finger on the pulse of the people. In the case of Yemen, as one of our speakers, Caleb Mopan, said, Yemen is the new Vietnam. And many people were interested in the struggle in Vietnam, and many, many more after the fact. And the same is true of the Yemen story. And the clip I referred to from Moats was also putting its finger on the button, on the pulse of the people. It was about an extraordinary story, but one which had largely been ignored by everyone else, certainly ignored by everyone else that claims to be on the left. And I'll come back to that point in just a minute. The proximate cause of my 57 seconds, that's all, in my monologue on Sunday was the astounding revelation that the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, our state broadcaster, for which we must pay on pain of imprisonment if we don't, had produced an education film for 9-year-old children. And I have a 9-year-old child. I have children at almost every age, but I have, as it happens, a 9-year-old child. And the BBC had produced a film for him and other 9-year-olds in which it was carefully explained that there are not two genders, there are 99 genders. Not 98 and not 100. Although I see some of the defenders of the BBC are saying, believe it or not, that they underestimated. There's 103 genders. And of course, this was all to be explained to young children of 9 in language, sexualized language, that none of us who are parents have ever been asked to assent to. And I merely made the point that I don't accept this nomenclature. And I was never asked for permission for my 9-year-old child to be exposed to it. And I am paying for it through my license fee. So on multiple levels, this was a fail for the state broadcaster, the BBC. And it went, as I say, completely wild, 100,000 views in one single day. And that included an overnight. It was really something amazing. Now, I stress here, it's not that we are against or even interested in how people define themselves in their own lives, how they dress, with whom they sleep, or what they do in bed. We're not interested at all in it. As it happens, as a man of my age and class, I think these things are personal and should be kept private. No need to advertise your proclivities and your tastes. If I did that, it would startle you all. I don't believe in doing that, but neither do I resist the 21st century trend to let it all hang out. But what I say is leave our kids alone. Stop sexualizing our children. There's plenty of time for our children to learn about these things. And the primary responsibility for teaching our children properly about such matters are the parents, the mother and the father. And that's how it is in my household. And I will not accept that household being gate crashed and my children's developing childhood being gate crashed by the woke, by the identity politics freaks that want to sexualize everything and that want to, well, make dirty that which need not be so. I'm not a prude, trust me on that. I'm not, Jacob Rees-Mogg, but I cannot accept that using license payers' money extorted from us, we can have our cultural life subverted by unaccountable, unelected people. Nobody had any say in what this BBC education film was going to say and show. And that's just unacceptable to me. And it would seem that it is unacceptable to a huge section of the British population. And I come back, therefore, as I said I would, to why it is it was left to me to burst this bubble. The so-called Conservative Party have for some decades, since they were Blairized, at least, under David Cameron, have been afraid of what you might think would be their natural territory. They are terrified to be thought conservative with a small c. The Labour Party, of course, is infested by people who are infatuated with this kind of woke identity politics. So you wouldn't expect it from them. The Liberal Democrats have disappeared off the radar, and in any case, they too are infested with this relatively new disease. If you'd told me at school there was 99 genders, I would have laughed in your face. And most people would have. But the Liberal Democrats have allowed this issue to enter them and take over them. And therefore you wouldn't expect it from them, but you wouldn't expect it from any other of these forces that regard themselves on the left, because they too have been captured by that spirit of wokeness and of identity politics. And therefore it was left to me. And I'm your leader. And therefore it was left to us. And once again, we have shown ourselves to be with the grain of the British people. We're not woke. We're economically radical, yes, but we believe in family values. We believe in the family. We believe in the rights of mothers and fathers in relation to their children. We believe in the rights of children to be children and not to be prematurely plunged into this kind of nonsense. And I hope that you endorse and have agreed with the stand that I have taken. I obviously have no time to consult you on this. It happened on Sunday morning that the story broke, and I had to broadcast on Sunday evening. But I'm sure that our party endorses the stand that I have taken. And it's not just in this kind of field. Imagine if we had not fought for Brexit. If we had not fought for Brexit, virtually nobody in Britain would have been vaccinated by now, instead of 6 million who have been vaccinated. 5 times more than have been vaccinated in Germany. God knows how many times more than have been vaccinated in France. In fact, the European Union is almost collapsing under the pressure of not just their failure to protect their public in the pandemic itself, a failure shared with us, and I will return to it, but at least Britain, outside of the European Union, has managed to act swiftly. It's remarkable that the Tories pulled that off, to be honest, given how badly they've done in every other respect, to order sufficient vaccines that our vaccination program, at least in England, is going well. Room for improvement, but it's going well. But the European Union is about to legislate to forbid any manufacturers of vaccines inside the European Union from exporting it anywhere else in the world, including, one presumes, to us. Now, so much for the famous internationalism of this European Union. If your vaccine is made in Europe, you can't send it to Africa or Asia or anywhere else until we have satisfied ourselves inside the European Union that we have enough product, enough stock. I think that speaks volumes about the European Union, but it also vindicates the stand that the leaders of the Workers' Party, we didn't exist as a party at the time, but all the leaders of the Workers' Party were prominent supporters of Brexit, because it allows us to do things independently, more quickly, and in our own national interest. And that's what's been done over the vaccine. But it's been another portentous week on the coronavirus front itself. I think the figure today is 1,752 dead. These numbers, in the first wave, the government took great pains to ensure that the figure never went over 1,000. They manipulated the figures so that on no single day did they concede that 1,000 people had died. Now 1,000 652 dead. A similar number yesterday, a similar number the day before. And now more than 100,000 people dead. Now, again, the Workers' Party analysis of the coronavirus issue has been completely vindicated. We were assailed, I could show you my scars, by COVID deniers, many of whom regarded themselves as being on the left, who tried to tell us that this virus was a hoax. Worse than a hoax, it was a conspiracy. Bill Gates had got it all up so he could put a tracker in everybody's veins via injection. We had anti-lockdown people. We had anti-mask people barking, yapping, biting at our heels. Where are they now? That so many people have now perished with this virus, and our hospitals buckling under the strain of the astounding virality of this epidemic, the atrocious waste of life that has occurred. We said to the British government, act now. China has told you this is coming in record quick time, not even 2 weeks. It took China to absolutely identify and analyze and break down this virus, which they immediately shared with the World Health Organization, which immediately shared it with all of its members, allowing all of its members to, on the double, jump to and take whatever precautions were necessary. And for those of us lucky enough in this regard to live on an island, the solution was much easier than it was for some others. But we did none of the things that we ought to have done. The things we did too late. The things we stopped doing, we stopped too early. And of course, we're paying the price for 40 years of neoliberalism in the Thatcher-Blair era, which made public the enemy of private, which made private good, public bad, which did everything it could to squeeze, reduce, impoverish, diminish all public services, including the National Health Service, all in the name of worshipping the gods of privatization and turning over what would be the last great public institution to be privatized in that Thatcher-Blair era. Another vindication of the stand of the Workers' Party. And our stance has been clear from the beginning. We have the government that we have. We can't, for the moment, affect that, so we must fire unrelentingly our perspectives on this issue, try to get as much popular support for them as we can, and force the government into performing better, into behaving less recklessly. And in another aspect, I dealt with this last week, but I now can put more flesh on the bones of it. I saw a young Labour MP, Sultana, I think, Zara Sultana, give an extraordinary speech in the committee room in the House of Commons, attended by virtually no one, listened to by virtually no one. I'm now trying to get views for that speech on YouTube, and everyone should watch it, in which this young woman, in a nervous voice, last August, I think. Trembling she is with indignation at the literally hundreds of millions of pounds worth of contracts that have been handed out to people, some of whom did not even perform, and whose only qualification for receiving those contracts was intimate, and I mean intimate, involvement with the Conservative Party and its politicians. Really intimate connections. And this young woman lays all this bare. And nobody could look at her, no wonder. And it buttresses the point that I and Dr. Ranjit have been making throughout this. It's not a public inquiry we need at the end of this. It's a trial we need at the end of this. A trial for the corporate manslaughter of all those who died, and a trial for the rampant, rather un-British, actually, levels of corruption involving a political party and political leaders and their cronies and hundreds of millions of pounds worth of public money. You know, only 50 years ago, such things were alien to the British political class. There was corruption, of course, lower level corruption and on the mega level, mega corruption. But this kind of in plain sight theft of public money was rare indeed in British public life. Now, I spoke to a businessman today who phoned me. Heaven knows how he got my phone number. He phoned me and sent me this speech made by this young woman. And he made the point that many of these contracts weren't even performed. And they were given to people who tried to buy PPE in China, in India, when there were established companies like his, the man who called me, with decades of experience of British manufactured PPE that were never even told this contract was up for grabs because it had been secretly, silently, corruptly given to companies that couldn't even perform in some cases, underperformed in all other cases, and lined the pockets of the Conservative Party. And no doubt the Conservative Party and the politicians within it will get some of that money back somehow in brown envelopes, in campaign donations. This is corruption on a scale that warrants a full trial for corruption alongside the trial for corporate manslaughter of those who left us and left our people in such vulnerable situation that more than 100,000, actually well over 100,000, they're marking today as the Rubicon of 100,000, but we crossed it in real terms some time ago. And with a death rate like today's, what's it going to be before all this is over? 150,000? And don't forget that the government advisor said at the beginning that a good, in quotes, good outcome of this would be 20,000 dead. Well, now we're more than 5 times that number, and the death rate is rising instead of falling. There's another area of vindication today, perhaps of less interest to a British audience, but of immense importance to the Scottish audience. And to those who care about justice, it ought to be noted as a very important day indeed. The Honourable Craig Murray was on trial today at the High Court in Edinburgh, a virtual trial, but not so virtual that it might not end up in him going to prison for 2 years and or receiving an unlimited fine for his reportage on his blog of the trials of Alex Salmond, the former First Minister of Scotland. Now, we as a party donated £500 to Craig Murray's legal defence appeal, which is just one of the reasons why I need to speak about it this evening. And we did so for a variety of reasons. We are not, of course, political allies of Craig Murray. He is a Scottish nationalist, but he is a person of great substance, of great integrity, and a person who has tirelessly campaigned for the freedom of Julian Assange, who was an ally of mine in the fight against the war on Iraq, for example. He is a person of note, a person of substance, and he's in court today, charged with contempt of court, when, as he describes peerlessly in his latest blog, which I commend to you, which is privileged in the sense it is his evidence, his affidavits, 2 of them, submitted to the High Court today. And when you read them, you'll agree with me to this extent, and you'll know that I have been saying this from the beginning. Alex Salmond was framed. He was framed in the most foul way by his own party, the governing party in Scotland, the SNP, party which he had led, and which forms a government that had been first established by him. And they conspired together, a small circle. For those of you, and I know there are many, again, I could show you my scars, who say things like, well, 14 women couldn't have made that up. Well, it depends who the 14 women were, doesn't it? And if you knew, which you cannot know, because of the laws on anonymity, then you'd conclude, as I did long ago, and Craig establishes in his affidavits today, that a conspiracy was hatched to send Alex Salmond to prison, and but for the good sense of a Scottish jury, the majority of whom were women, Salmond was acquitted on all counts. And therefore, the fuse was set for an explosion which is now occurring and which will destroy the premiership of Nicola Sturgeon and her oleaginous husband, the chief executive of the SNP. They will be gone very soon, if not this week, then the week after, when other court actions are expected, and when Alex Salmond speaks to the inquiry in the Scottish Parliament into all these events. Another vindication for me, for us, for the stand that we have taken. I'm not a supporter of Alex Salmond or Nicola Sturgeon, although he's the better by the length of the River Thames and more. But I am for justice, no matter who for, no matter who against. And we had the courage of our convictions. We disdain to hide our views. We stand up for what we believe to be right. And increasingly, we're proved right. And increasingly, we get the public's respect for having done so. Thanks very much for listening. Happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, George. That was a great rundown of the events and concerns that have come up in the last week or so, that we, want to be looking at and understanding what our position towards them will be. I'll just say on this point of what you were talking about with the contracts, the PPE procurement, and the corporate manslaughter that we've seen with the government's handling of coronavirus. I'm just looking at some of the comments in the chat there. Of course, even under a capitalist economic system, there are rules and regulations that could be put in place that would, prevent such a sort of this sort of happening to such a disgusting extent. But we've also got to remember that the position that we're in now, where that is the state of affairs that we're dealing with, is the result of a long, protracted struggle on behalf of capital to break down what regulations there were in the past to prevent that kind of unseemly sort of handling of things. So we've got to remember that always at the end of the day, capital is only seeking to turn a profit. The ways that things actually play out, you can understand where people might get the idea that things are somehow arranged to sort of happen certain ways because they see that people are making profits and doing well at some end of the spectrum with the situation. But we've got to remember that that's essentially how capital operates all the time. Whatever the situation, whatever the crisis, it's always seeking to feather its own nest and make something out of it. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that even within the political and economic system that we've got in this country, we could definitely fight for things being put in place that would make sure that this never happens again. But anyway, I won't go on too much longer. I'm going to come to Claire because you've got your hand up. So if you're able to unmute, Claire.
Okay, can you hear me?
You can.
Yes, Claire.
I should have known that this might be mentioned tonight at the meeting. And I'm annoyed at myself because I feel very emotional about the issue around gender politics. And I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to contain that emotion and still make some salient points. Not that I really need to, because you covered it all there, George. You said that we're not woke. And I know that when I first joined the party, I think it was in March, my heart was pounding because I'd just come off Twitter in a number of spats, because I just started to read what was going on and get a feel for what was going on, because my first stance was, of course, be liberal, be accepting, be inclusive, whatever the hell that means. And it was like, and the knee-jerk reaction is to play fair and to do that. And over those months and over trying to educate myself, which I think I've done reasonably well, I realized that under the language of the battles for sexual equality, that's been hijacked. And it's been hijacked in a way that has closed down debate. That's always a dangerous sign, isn't it? When there isn't actually a debate. When we're talking about a lack of freedom of speech. There are things I'll say on these Zooms that I will not say at work. How's that? How can I not say certain things at work? I just keep my head down. For now, I think it's the wisest thing to do. I'm not happy with that. It doesn't sit well with me. Because when you're talking around the BBC, when you're talking around gender and not sex, and the nullification of biological reality, you're not talking about a grassroots movement. You're talking about top down. You're talking about big pharmaceutical companies that's where the capitalism comes in clearly. That's where, well, I think it's multifaceted. I think they're out to make huge amounts of money out of children, despite the blip at Tavistock just recently. Let's hope that that's a trend. But they're out to make huge amounts of money. They're also out to distract us, and it is a distraction, and I fall for it. Sometimes I think, you know, will you just get off Twitter? Will you just stop engaging with it? But it's difficult because it's children. I teach, I've got a daughter, I'm concerned. It's hard not to be. And the thing that you said, George, is about justice. It's unjust when women are, and it's not just women, it's women, it's gay men, it's whoever it is, arguing for even just for a debate on this. They're completely closed down. That whole cancel culture thing comes in, but it's no joke. People lose their jobs. It's unbelievable. Whilst wearing rainbows and talking language of liberation, it's repellent. It's deeply repellent. And as I say to you, I know it's a distraction, but I still think there are certain battles to be fought. And I still think that you have to show respect to those people who are putting themselves on the line to say, no, no further, particularly around safeguarding of children. I think that's vitally important. Yeah, so I think you standing up and saying, of all the parties, you standing up and saying it, and then standing up and saying, no, we don't believe in this, not to garner publicity or popularity, but to say, actually, this is a basic value, and if you don't agree with us, and this will shut them down. Let's talk about it. Let's debate it, because I'm telling you now, you won't get that. What you get is slander, offensiveness, name calling, and that reveals that they stand on very unsure ground. So thank you for making that point this week. I think it's really important. Thank you, George.
Well, thank you, Claire. Look, we're not woke, but we are awake. And we're awake to what's going on. We are different from capital C conservatives, if there are any, that are standing up on this. We're not Jacob Rees-Mogg. We are in favor of everyone's rights to live their lives, including their sex lives, as they please. But we have two red lines. One of them is, leave our kids alone. Don't dare start pushing this stuff into the minds, down the throats of our small children. We don't consent to that. And by the way, as you're a teacher, let me say this. It's not just the BBC. It's a significant part of the teaching community themselves. The reason you can't say what you say on this Zoom in the staff room is because a significant number of teachers, I'm sure it's not the majority, but neither is it a tiny minority, who have bought into this stuff. I know that because I'm the one that gets the brickbats, I'm the one that gets the slander, the name calling and the rest, and a good deal of it is from teachers. So this is a problem. If the BBC and the teachers are arrogating to themselves the right to tell my 9-year-old that actually there's 99 genders, and here's what they're all called, and here's what they all do with each other or to each other, you're poisoning the mind of my child, and I will not assent to that. And of course, they can only do this because others are cowed into silence about it. They don't want to be seen to be party poopers. They don't want to be seen to be quote unquote reactionary or old fashioned or all the other much worse words that they use. And that's why you have to burst the bubble. You have to say, actually, I'm mad as hell about this, and I'm not going to put up with it any longer. And when you do, as I did, you discover that there are huge numbers of people in the country who feel the same, but had no political voice for the reasons I explained earlier. Because no politician, I wish I could name them, people that were close to Corbyn, when I would, and people whose politics are no different to mine, none, not sixpence different to mine. And I would say, why are you allowing this, the Labour Party, the party of the workers, born of the trade unions, to become a kind of menagerie, a zoo of sexual politics, identity politics, everything but class politics? And these people would caution me. Well, of course you're right, but you know, if one was to say that in today's Labour Party, or that today, a couple of years ago, Labour Party, you would explode the whole thing. Because this is where it's at. This is the zeitgeist. Well, that may be one of the reasons why it all went down in flames. Because, of course, if you are seen to be proselytizing for the 99 genders agenda, all the people who actually quietly agree with me and you are hardly likely to be enthused to come out and vote for you, hardly likely to see you as speaking and acting for them. But the other issue, which you're better qualified to talk on than me, is that all of this stuff is not just against our kids' interests, it's against women's interests. They are abolishing women. But if there's 99 genders, and I'm willing to bet 98 of them are one form or another of identification as women, what about the actual women? What about the women that don't want a guy with a penis in the changing room? That don't want their daughter to have to get changed at the swimming pool alongside somebody who's identifying as a woman, and so on. You know the case better than me. This is misogyny, actually. This is an anti-women movement because it denies the special characteristics, benefits, disbenefits, hardships, and so on of actual women who have lived experience of being actually a woman, which someone merely identifying as a woman does not have, cannot have. So I believe we're standing up for women's rights with our stand, as well as defending our children under assault.
Thanks very much, George and Claire. I'm going to come to Max next. You've got something to say. If you're able to turn your camera on and unmute, Max.
Yep. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yep.
Good evening, everyone. So George,
Evening, Max.
as a teacher, I've been alternating between teaching in school and from home. And it feels like when there's these lockdowns, so-called lockdowns, it's never consistent. So, you know, when things were closed, I was still in school. Now that I'm stuck teaching from home until February, airports are open, things are open, streets are buzzing. People are getting really, really pissed off with, the third lockdown and everything. It's understandable. So I guess my question is, am I being too cynical in thinking that the government are really choosing to do the herd immunity? Do they have anything to gain? Is it lightening burden of pensions, which they might want to attack? I mean, is that too cynical of me? That's my question.
I think the jury's out on whether it's too cynical. It's right to be cynical in part because you don't need to look in the crystal ball. They said it themselves in print. They said it in Sage, I think. They said it elsewhere. And Boris Johnson said it, canvassed it at least on television, that one way of handling this is the so-called herd immunity. In less public settings, they said that if you let it rip, some pensioners will die, but the economy will be protected, and so on. Having said that, I think the government is under a lot of pressure from capitalism expressing itself through the backbenchers in the Conservative Party to abandon these lockdowns and restrictions. And it's said that the statements made today by Boris Johnson that he'll start to look at relaxing some of these restrictions in mid-February, which the science would suggest is far too early. But this is driven by his own political weakness inside the Conservative Party over this matter. If it was left to the ERG, the hardliners in the Conservative Party, I don't think we would have had a lockdown at all. I don't think we would have had the restrictions that we've had at all. And we're in the position as a workers' party that, first of all, we insisted, and we insist until now, that no worker must be forced to go to work in an unsafe environment, and that no worker thus furloughed must see their, in many cases, already parlous living conditions reduced because they have had to be furloughed because the environment was unsafe. That's our duty as a workers' party, to defend the rights of the workers. But of course, workers have children, and workers have elderly parents, and workers live in the wider society. And that's why we said that we use the word lockdown in quotes. There is no real lockdown. 20 million people are going to work. The airports are still open. The lack of consistency and the lack of results from the government's actions are leading to significant counter feeling amongst the population, whether it's because people are having, I mean, this has been a long time, a whole year. You see what's happening in Amsterdam and Rotterdam and elsewhere in the Netherlands over the last 5 nights. It's not a small thing to be putting curfews on people. It's not a small thing to be locking everything down and for such a long period. But it's the zigzag that is the problem. If we had taken China-style action at the beginning, we'd all now be back at the football. I'd be at Old Trafford tonight. The restaurants would. There's a pub, an Irish pub, just been built in Moscow, and it's full of people drinking in an Ersatz or Donohue's or whatever. But they're not drinking in the pubs in Ireland because some countries took decisive action at the beginning, real decisive action. They are now over the worst of it. In China, even in Wuhan, they're attending festivals and sports events and openly moving around back to normal life. And we didn't do that. And that's what has left the government so friendless. It has done all this, and we still lost over 100,000 people. And we've still wrecked the economy. It wasn't a choice between either or. We got both. We got the attrition and we got the economic disaster. And in that economic disaster, of course, quite clearly, some people are feasting on the dripping roast of other people's misery. Big companies are picking off, I was going to say medium-sized companies, but some of them are actually themselves large companies, but just not as large as those that are now picking off their assets at fire sale prices. And that will be a pattern that will accelerate throughout this year and into next. That big capital, Amazon, the owner of Amazon, is now not a billionaire. He's now a trillionaire. I spoke to a man recently who's making millions collecting, shifting, and destroying the cardboard that everyone's had to dump outside their front door because of all these deliveries that Amazon and these other companies are making. Some people did well out of the war, and some people are doing very well out of the coronavirus.
Thanks very much, George. I'm going to come to Joseph next, if you're able to unmute yourself, Joseph.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, Joseph, yeah.
So when I was 1 year old, there was the biggest protest in the world, which was the Iraq War protest. This is kind of leading on from the Yemen talk on Monday, which was really good. But what can that was the biggest protest in the world, had millions of people, but it still wasn't able to stop the invasion of Iraq, and it still wasn't able to stop the slaughter of millions. So what can we do in the working class in general and the Working Class Party in particular to stop imperialist wars happening? That's it.
Well, of course, we have no magic wand, and what we can do is directly related to our size and strength and the clarity of our politics. And that's what we're working on. That's a work in progress. Imperialism is a very powerful enemy. It's not as powerful as it was before, at the time that you were born. At the time that you were born, it was hegemonic. Now you're a man, it's not any longer hegemonic. China has risen. Russia has recovered its strength and some of its prestige. There's an aroused part of every population in the imperialist world that opposes war, not as many as there should, and not with as much clarity as there should be, but there is a substantial opposition to imperialist war in all imperialist countries. And the anti-imperialist countries are bigger and more powerful and more able to defend themselves than they were before. Even a broken country like Iran, broken by sanctions or decades of sanctions, ravaged by the coronavirus, and endlessly subject to terrorist attack from imperialism. Iran is well able to defend itself. That's why it hasn't been invaded and will not be invaded. North Korea will not be invaded. China will not be invaded, neither will Russia. So this is a dynamic question. You cannot say how long the piece of string is. It depends how much string we are able to generate. And we're doing our best in informing people and mobilizing people behind the anti-war struggle. But I said our size and our strength, but our clarity is also important. And on this, we are perfectly clear. And we are the only people who are perfectly clear. We are the only anti-war movement that is perfectly clear. And that clarity is this, that we will oppose imperialism wherever and against whomsoever. Not because we support necessarily the government of the latest target. In many cases, we'll have long records of not supporting them. But in the fight between the big pirate and the little pirate, we're with the little pirate because the big pirate is the bigger enemy, and the big pirate is here at home.
Thanks very much, George. I think it's a good point and a good question, isn't it, for Joseph to bring up there. It just brought to mind one of our members had sent to me earlier on today. They'd noticed the Independent in a tweet, I think it was, using the cover of Holocaust Remembrance Day, which today is marking the day that the Auschwitz concentration camp was liberated by the Red Army. It used the cover of this with the hashtag to call for action against China for its what it claims to be genocide committed against Uyghur Muslims with no evidence. I mean, this is a subject that we've touched on, we've discussed in our meetings before. But we've got to be aware how pernicious this sort of propaganda is, the way that it's so slyly slipped in with things to kind of subvert what kind of protection people might have against being tricked into believing certain things. But it is all over the place, and taking these things up, calling them out, proving them to be wrong is a big part of what we need to be doing.
Can I respond to that, please, if you don't mind?
Yes.
It's good that you raise it. Every day is Holocaust Remembrance Day for me, and every day I draw it to other people's attention also. This fascist barbarism, which had the intention of entirely annihilating, eliminating from the face of the earth every Jew that they could get their hands on, is our mortal enemy. And we will never stop highlighting the sheer barbarism of Hitler fascism and the axis against which our people fought between 1939 and 1945. We will never stop or apologize for doing this. I force people to look at the young children, the old women, the men and women of all ages that were industrially massacred in the Holocaust. Millions, 6 million of them Jewish, but of course, millions of others also. Communists, socialists, trade unionists, Roma, disabled people, Jehovah's Witnesses, all kinds of people, homosexuals, who were systematically annihilated by this monster machine of fascism. But neither shall we flinch from pointing out that this was brought to an end by the Soviet Union, by the Red Army. Auschwitz was not liberated by anyone other than the Red Army, which fought and lost tens of millions of people. in the battle to defeat fascism. And we will not allow them to use the cover of remembrance of the Holocaust to target and seek to divide, weaken, if possible, destroy the very countries, China and Russia, which lost the most people in the Second World War. If the Soviet Union lost some 28 millions, China lost almost 20 millions. And yet they want to use this imagery as a weapon against Russia and against China. We will not stand for it. And one of our comrades, Ruben, has made a cracking little video, which will be out on Sunday, premiered on the mother of all talk shows, on this very subject of China and the Muslim question. So look out for that. Thanks very much for the opportunity to say that.
Thanks, George. We're about to close in a minute. We've come up to 9 o'clock, but I've just got a message from Beju in London. I'd just like to read this out before we close.
Sure.
He said, "I'd just like to commend the Workers' Party on broadcasting a great meeting on Yemen. It had excellent speakers and was very informative. I like Caleb Morgan's description of it being the modern day Vietnam. The media at that time played an important role in highlighting the wrongs of the war to the American people, which was helpful to its outcome, a victory for the massive underdog Vietnam. And now similarly, the media, and of course our media, can also play a significant part in showing Yemen's plight to the world. And the Workers' Party meeting was exceptional in doing this. It's a shame that George couldn't be there, but it was a brilliant meeting. So thanks for that, Beju. And any of you members who are here in the meeting, if you haven't already watched the recording from that meeting on Monday, please do. And same goes for all of the people watching online on YouTube and other platforms. It's really worth a watch. Great speakers that have come on there. So please do tune in and find that recording. That's us for this evening. Good night, George. Thanks to everyone that's participated, and have a good evening and see you next week.